Hello to everybody, whether we know each other or not. Um, I came to photography from theater, so a lot of what I learned to take into photography, I learned in theater, particularly improvisation. And really, any art form you do is improvisation, because even if you start out with a terrific plan that you have to follow, that you want to follow, the minute you enter into the actual work, things are going to change, and that's what you want to have happen. You don't want to do what you set out to do. You want to do something that's better, something that surprises you. This project that we're going to look at tonight, this book with of the work of Darrell Petit, it was an improvisation. It never started out to be a book. It only really became a book about 10 or 12 years into it. I spent my working life doing a lot of advertising photography, basically making things look better than they look, and in many cases better than they have any right to look. So it was really interesting when I heard about this sculptor and saw some of his work. I thought this would be great to photograph because I wouldn't have to make it look better. I just have to get with it and wrap myself around it rather than change it. And because he was making the work in a quarry right up the street from me, I was able to run up there at any point in different kinds of weather, different times of day, whenever something was going on. And I would say, I'm trying to remember, Darrell, and back in those days, you were still in the era of the plastic sheet with 35 millimeter slides in it, that's how we showed things to people. So it was very interesting. I knew that I could maybe do something helpful to him by photographing his work. And it accumulated and accumulated. And at a certain point, Blurb came into being, and I thought I should put this into some kind of a book, something that's more managed than just a bunch of frames. And so we did that, and it was very interesting and very successful in its own way. But I always wanted to go beyond what we had managed to do with Blurb. So 10 years after the Blurb book, I said to Darrell, let's take it further. I had never done anything like that, so Darrell was really very trusting and sort of said, okay. And we have collaborated on this in an interesting way, not in the sense that we sit down together and work things out and then do them, but we sort of, it's like a ping pong ball that we bat back and forth. What I really wanted to get was I always want to get this, what it felt like to be there with the work, what it feels like to be among the work, with the work towering over you. These pieces are very big. They are 18 feet tall, 20 feet tall. I think the tallest is about 27. They're granite, and they are very heavy. And there's always this sense of danger when you walk in under them, which is part of the thing that makes them very interesting and keeps you on your toes. This is some of the work, and this is sort of how the book came into being. This is a piece called Kiss. Darrell does a lot of work that is about suspending great pieces of stone leaning against each other. There's always a tension and a dynamic, as you can see, that this is a leaning piece. And it became the cover of the book. The other thing I wanted to do that was different than most books of this kind, would focus on the work, and then there might be some photographs of it being made or something like that. And there would be some an art history kind of, or art historian kind of essays. Darrell wanted to do something very different, so did I. So the essays are by Laura Solano, who's a landscape architect, and Claudia LaRocco, who is a a dance critic for the New York Times. And it was just fascinating to invite a dance critic to critique the work and talk about the work. This is the Stony Creek Quarry from directly above. Stony Creek is a boutique historic quarry on the Connecticut coast, right up the street from my house. And this is the pit, looking right down into the pit. And this is where Darrell gets his stone and does his work. It's an extraordinary place to be around. It's very visual. It's really like no place else. It must be I think it is very inspiring to him to work there. This is the first picture, and actually, this is before I photographed any of his work. I photographed him because I was interested in the way he looked. I love to do portraits. And in particular, I love to do portraits that have, forgive me for this, Darrell, I love to do portraits of people who have kind of a weird intensity. And you did, and you do, and there you are. From that, this is the woods around the quarry, the way big blocks juxtapose and make sculptures and play in the light. And then you go on into the quarry, and there's a piece of Darrell's that it relates to what goes on in the woods. But there's a great deal of work that is going on in this. We'll see more of it a little bit later on. This is a piece, I think it's called Untitled, if I'm not mistaken, and that's some of the old quarry machinery behind it there on a foggy day. I love foggy days, so it's a great gift to be able to just hop in the car and go drive up and look at things. This is the piece that you see on the cover of the book before it left the quarry. I think it's 18 feet tall or so. And I think it's about 28 tons, the whole thing. Now, the interesting thing is that Darrell doesn't have an idea in his mind that he then goes and chisels out of the granite. He more or less listens to the granite. He finds something that interests in him and sort of pulls it out and discovers it. So he's like a diamond cutter in that sense, but he's on a much, much bigger scale. This is an in-progress piece up in the quarry. Those are those big plastic things that he uses actually to dummy up certain parts of the stone to get an idea of how things are going to lean and how they're going to work. I think it's safe to say that as much as he works on that, it always comes out a little bit differently than he thinks it's going to. So when it gets set up on site, there's always that moment of, is it gonna do what we thought it was gonna do? This is part of KISS being moved, and that's the mechanism. That's how it's done with these huge cranes and these guys who've been working with him for years, and they're these delicate people who know how to move this stuff without dropping it. Stone that looks solid, it is solid, but it's also fragile toward the edges, so it has to be handled more carefully than you might guess. This is one of Darrell's main tools. It's a torch, and it literally melts the granite. He shapes the granite by literally melting it. He's always looking around the quarry, and as he put it, I'm looking for something that looks back at me. So there's a pile of these big stones up near where he's working that he's identified, and they bring them up there, and he looks at them and looks at them. Now, we photographers work in terms of 60ths of seconds, and Darrell will take often several years to do something. Darrell, am I right that a year or two is a pretty good estimate?
Yeah, I think most recently Lyra McKee is probably 5 years. So it's the long haul.
Yeah. This is Laura McKee being worked on, polished, And that's a little hand polisher up there. And that's what went on for months and months and months during the winter, during the cold, from above. And to me, it looks like a whale, like somebody polishing a whale. This is getting the torch ready to work on the stone. Where is that piece of stone now, Darrell?
Um, that's up there. So part of the slowness is things don't work out all the time. And this was put aside
Ah,
because it wasn't uh, working out to the extent that it should have. And I think the advantage of working in this environment is you have a multitude of granites, and I'm really free to take these risks that, sometimes don't go anywhere, sometimes do. And I think that's a real freedom.
yeah, yeah. This is the installation of a piece that Darrell did. This is up in Boston on what street is this? Dalton?
That's One Dalton, Boston. Yeah.
One Dalton in Boston. Kind of a series of narrow streets leading into this one spot, and you can see what an operation it is to bring things in and to get them set up. And that's the piece finished as it was set up. This is looking at that big piece, Kiss, when it was in the 50th anniversary show at the Stone King Art Center up in the Hudson River. And this is part of a film that I made there. So I actually learned a lot about filmmaking. And there's the piece standing where it was set up. I learned a lot about filmmaking, working on stuff with Darrell about his work. Which is very kinetic and very visual. This is another leaning piece, a little different in that it's more horizontal than vertical. It's called Sumo. We shot it in the moonlight. And you can see all the little sparkles of the crystals that are in the granite. This is another piece or pieces. Is it a piece? I don't know. It's a sort of Zen garden, rock garden of some friends of Darrell's, and the space was so confined that I couldn't get a sense of it from anywhere. I couldn't get a sense of the whole thing from anywhere. So I just did pieces of it and turned it into this collage. I think it's true to it. I hope so.
If I could just interject, it is a genius way to approach your problem. Too tight for you to really get the scope of it. You didn't fall for a trick like working with a super wide angle lens or anything crazy like that. You went to collage. Great thinking.
And that's what it felt like to be around this piece more than when we tried to do it sort of with a wide angle. It got it all in, but it looked totally wrong. There's another piece that Darrell did in Norway in the winter. Was this in the winter? That's later on, I guess. But this is a beautiful stone, a granite, blue pearl, a kind of a lovely deep surface that you that you get on this stone when you polish it. We'll see more of that a little bit later on. This is something you will see. Naomi Darling on the screen there is Darrell's wife and a wonderful architect who designed this tea house for us. We thought we were going to get a gazebo. She straightened us out and said, "No, you're getting a tea house." And the stone down in front of it was brought from the quarry. Darrell located that and brought it down. And that worked out so well that Naomi designed and built really a studio for me and prevailed on Darrell to make these piers on which it rests from quarried block. And which is, to me, I've always thought it was like having Constantine Brancusi do your basement on your new addition. But this is a pedestal that Darrell did. It's part of a sculpture. It's the base for a Torosaurus down at the Peabody Museum in New Haven. And I just love this picture. I love doing it in the snow. Another picture from the quarry in the snow.
I think these are really experiential, and that to me is important in that really the collaboration that we've always had is that, the experience is what's pushing us.
Yes, yes.
Those photographs, to me, are really about putting somebody or inviting somebody into an experience, more than just looking and seeing what's there.
Yes.
And these are profound, I think.
I mean, outdoor sculpture, I would think you have to take into account moonlight, snow, rain, sun. That was what was so much fun about working on this, is that we could get a sense of that. This is a couple of new pieces, not so new, but they're up there now. And so that the way we lit this and the cover was to put a little light on a drone and then light paint the pieces. And so we would go up there at dusk and make a base exposure and then fly the drone over it and hope to God it was working. There's another piece quite nearby here, a nod towards Stonehenge, full size. How many tons is this piece? Hundreds, yeah?
It's close to 1,000. I think it's about 750 tons of Norwegian fjord pearl larvikite.
And this is the stuff that you went over in the winter, quarried these and polished them in the winter, right?
Yes. The winter in Norway is dark, but the operation we were working with is elite, so it was possible. And the reflectivity we were after in the polish was something that frankly stood out working around a field of white snow. So sometimes that context makes it advantageous to be working on certain aspects.
How cold was it?
Well, Norway's on the coastline, so close to zero, but snow is plentiful. So that's I've always found it exciting to work in the snow. It sort of isolates the piece, and you're faced with the piece and nothing else around it. So you end up focusing very quickly.
I just think of myself and maybe other photographers who would think it's too cold. I'm going in. I want some hot chocolate or something. This is the same piece seen from the air.
Yeah, I want to point out, Sean, not so much this piece, but most of the work that you've shot, often there's experiences and perspectives that I can't get being on the ground, being
Yeah.
up so close to the work. And so the slowness helps because I'm able to observe things that I couldn't otherwise see.
Hmm.
I may know in my mind, but through your perspective, I'm learning something that enables me to move
Huh.
in directions that I couldn't otherwise, or probably wouldn't have the courage to move because I can't see it correctly. Um, and that's been a huge breakthrough, really,
Huh.
over the years.
We'll talk about envisioning things and right there. I'll leave that up for a second. You can read it.
My language is the rock in the process of taking what I'm feeling, my experience around a material, into a form, the sculptural form, sculpture in the end. But it's never clear for me the pathway. The creative process is never that programmatically clear for me. I trust when it's not. I trust that more than I would if I knew exactly what I wanted to do, knew the material I was going to work with, then started forward in the execution of the idea towards an ultimate goal.
And exposure to this was very important for me. I'm going to talk about getting hit on the head. Is that okay? Briefly, slightly.
It's true.
Darrell was a hockey player, and in a slightly hockey adjacent event, he got hit on the left hemisphere of prefrontal cortex, and in a real sense got rearranged. In a real sense, this guy who was studying architecture and city planning got kicked into his right hemisphere, his plastic, his artistic, visionary hemisphere, and what I have come to feel is that exactly that. I trust when I don't know what's happening, that's when I think something interesting is possibly happening. And I think of all the good work of almost any art form, and however much work goes into it, in its origins, it's opaque. You can't, you just have a sense that there's something in the cave and you have to go in after it and trust that. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to convince people to do. It's very hard to convince myself to do. And this is what it looks like when you get pelted by stone for a while, dust. This is back in the day at Socrates Sculpture Park in New York, right?
1993.
93. This is a photograph.
First time a work was put out into the world in on exhibit. It was my first shot, really, by Mark DeSuvro and Richard Bellamy through the invitation.
Well, where is this again? Socrates Park? Where in New York? Is it New York City or?
Yeah, Socrates is Long Island City, Queens. It's on the East River, so we're looking at Manhattan. And this was a park developed by Richard Bellamy and Mark DeSuvro, one of America's most foremost sculptors. And this is a public park now. It's become a New York City park, right on Vernon Jackson and Broadway in Long Island City, next to the Noguchi Museum, which is another hugely influential museum for me.
And that's a DeSuvro in the left-hand side of the picture, yeah? The background?
That's correct.
And so that is the story of the book. Now, the next thing I want to do is hold that thought, and I want to show you something else. I mentioned that working from not knowing, how very important that became to me, has become to me. Something you can't do in the commercial world. You cannot do that. I spent most of my time in the commercial world getting ready and trying to eliminate any possibility of anything being unknown when we turned up. Now that's how I want to turn up. And So a little while back, I started to do something that I'd never done before. It was a matter of going through work that I had done, finding things that I had set aside that worked for some reason, some strange reason, and putting them together with other things that had no connection to them at all, and to see if they would connect, if they would, the spark would leap from one to the other. So I've spent a lot of time rounding things up and trying them out in sequences, and I'm just going to run through a bunch of things. I'm not going to comment on them. I'm just going to run through them. And in this way, my sense is that you become a participant in the whole thing, because you're the one who's going to have to put it together.
That was cool.
It changes all the time. It's like, yeah, honestly, I look at this and I think I'd like to go back, throw out everything I ever did and start again. I really would. I'd do everything so differently now, but there we are. I would be delighted to take any questions that anybody has.
You could drop your question into the, or you could unmute yourself and go
I
ahead.
would be curious, I'm Sean's wife, and I've witnessed over the years all of this and the incredible friendship between Darrell and Sean. I was very impacted just now by watching these, and I would love it for people to just give a one-word response to the state they're in after experiencing that, if that's appropriate.
You could drop that into the chat.
Oh, sorry, I should do that, yeah.
Definitely. I'll start that off with a. Oh, thank you, Karen. The one I thought what was cool, the harmony of verticals and horizontals. And there's one horizontal where the guy is coming down the steps, and there's a lot of lines, the silhouette of the guy coming down the steps. And I thought what was cool about that was I kind of falling into the monitor watching the slideshow. I kind of felt like that was a horizontal, and then I kind of went back a little bit and realized it was actually a vertical. And then your next shot after that's back to a horizontal. It's sort of it's the vertical that has the DNA of a horizontal. Really cool composition.
Interesting, interesting. I love hearing that. Yeah, like I love the idea of creating the experience of not knowing what's going on, but knowing that something is going on. And that's why whenever I've worked on that sequence, I have to stop myself from falling back into habits of, well, this would link nicely with that, and making a fluid progression out of it. I talked with David about this afternoon. There was a guy called Alexei Brodovich who came over from Paris. He was Russian originally, and he became the art director at Vogue and then at Harper's Bazaar. And up until that point, and this was the late 30s, early 40s, early 50s, magazine design what you tried to do was make a flow through the magazine, a stately turning of this page and then this page. And what he did was he tried to get you to stop on a page. He did not want you to flow through. And his work was really kind of shocking often. His charge to his photographers was to say, astonish me, astonish me. And he was wildly influential. There was a lab that would meet, and it was Art Kane was in it, Irving Penn was in it, I think Avedon was in it, Henry Wolff, all these incredible photographers and designers. And what it led to was things like the cover of Esquire that was Muhammad Ali with tied to a stake with arrows in him, kind of like St. Stephen. And it was just, nobody had ever seen anything like that. It was so radical and so in your face and kind of disturbing in a way, but so a lot of stuff looks the way it looks now because of that. And I think it's very easy to fall back into the flow, to making the flow work. It's easier than making it challenging to go from one image to another. But when you do it, it leaves room for an observer, for the reader or the whoever's looking at the piece to make the bridge themselves. I had a show. I'm just tired of looking at framed matted prints on the wall, and I'm looking for different ways to show things and things that don't go in a line. Here's a good question. How many years back did I go to create that sequence? And did I have a thought for this particular sequence before I went into it? No, I didn't. I don't, the impulse was like Charles Ives' father. Charles Ives' father was a bandmaster in Danbury, Connecticut. And at one point, he took his band, he divided it in two, and he had them play different songs and march through each other. And young Charles Ives, who was probably 3, hanging out of his hand, this, if you listen to his piece, Putnam's Camp and 3 Places in New England, that's what it is. Things not going together, but things banging against each other and making disharmony in a way that's quite beautiful. As Deanne Arbus said about something, she said, I find this ugliness beautiful. How many years back? Well, the opening picture was part of a film I did for CBS television in 1975. So I'd almost rather not do the math, but 50 years. So, and no, I didn't have a thought. And in fact, I kept trying to exclude thought. I kept trying to discover something rather than make it be something. I wanted to see what it was. And it keeps changing. I'm doing the same thing in video now. It's proving to be much harder because I love film. I love making video. One of the differences is that video or film, you have to decide, you, the director, have to decide, okay, we're going to look at this for this many seconds, and then we're going to slowly turn around and see this, and then we'll fade to this. And you have to sort of try and get a feel for that, for the timing of things. And stills, you put stills down, the looker, the observer is the one who does the timing. And they stay as long as they want to and make the transition or don't, or find a meaning that has perhaps nothing to do with whatever you might think it is, you, the creator of the whole thing. So it's really interesting. Would I say that the spirit moves me more than I thought? Yes, I think there are ways of knowing where you sort of know that you know, and then there are ways of knowing that you don't know that you know them. God, this is going back to who? George Bush's era. Who was that Secretary of Defense? The known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. But you're aware that they're there. I've done a lot of digging into how the brain works, and the right hemisphere, which is where perception comes in and forms, but it doesn't use language, it doesn't use ideas. It just is, boom, there it is, fully. And then it gets transferred over to the left hemisphere, which comes up with a definition and a description and a place where it fits. And that's why that's what I was so interested in Darrell's work, was because he was doing that very directly and on a very large scale and on a very long scale. Again, with photography, it was easy to work it out pretty quickly, but much harder to do it in granite.
Another thing that you've got, Sean, going on through your work is your fine artwork in particular, is the natural environment is front and center among trees. Even the filmmaking with the crow work, one could argue that that's a very natural, indigenous rituals, and was very close to the natural world. Among trees, of course, this sculpture work, and you talk about loving to go out into the environment. So I think when that one question that Adger Cohen's asked about spirit, is it the spirit of the earth that kind of moves you a little bit? Have you ever thought about that?
I think it's more of awareness, and which has a huge spiritual aspect. Just being present there, not walking in and saying, where's the photograph here? You know, if there was a room behind me and some important person was going to speak, the King of England was going to speak in an hour, a Secret Service person would come in and say, where are the exits? Where are the windows? What do we have to worry about? An interior decorator would come in and say, God, we have to clean this up and get some different furniture. Photographer would walk in and say, where's the picture? But a 2-year-old would walk in and he wouldn't say anything. He would just accept the whole thing and he would get it all at once. And I'm trying to be a 2-year-old again, basically. I'm trying to recultivate that in me because I think that's where the really wonderful work happens and the insight happens, not because you think, but because you perceive, you shut up, you see, you grok it. I mean, the natural world can be a little bit seductive sometimes. Who was that? Jim Brandenburg, was it? Who did that wonderful series? He'd put a roll of film in his camera and he'd click off 35 shots and he'd take a walk. And he'd take one picture. That was it. And he did a beautiful book of that. So he was really practicing presence. Now, we photographers have motor drives, so we can just shoot off a lot of work in no time without even thinking, without even looking, really. And maybe something will happen, maybe something will come of it. But to really, really walk into a space and sit there for half an hour rather than saying, where's the picture? That's my practice these days.
Got to take you out, do a little street photography. Is
Yes.
that you really just kind of put yourself in a good spot and wait?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
so I have a question for Darrell. Darrell, I'm a photographer. I'm not a sculptor at all, but I am a big fan of the Italian Renaissance and studied by Michelangelo. And one of the concepts of Michelangelo is that he was freeing the form that was inside that marble, or at least that's how I was always taught it. And Sean mentioned something about that, what you see inside of it. Can you talk about your process about how you choose the piece and find what your magic that's inside of it?
Well, I think the earth is fundamental here because I'm working in the quarry, which literally is in the earth. And so versus working in a more typical way where the earth would come into the studio. And then at that point, in my mind, it's already 80% finished. So going into the earth, you are dealing with the formation itself, and that is the natural state of things. And with that comes all sorts of contingencies and aberrations and eccentricities and mistakes and blocks, because that is what is typically coming out of the earth for the world of architecture is the block, and that's a Euclidean shape. I'm not so interested in that, but I'm interested in that early sourcing, the harvesting of the material. And Michelangelo also was, I mean, it's so difficult to talk about Michelangelo, but Michelangelo was somebody who went to the mountain and is a, one of our greatest for that reason, and understood the nuance of the material and all of its collaborative aspects. And what I mean by that is you are going and working with the formation and what it enables you to do. You're also working with, at this point, man-made operations. And so I'm able to as Sean said, just be there, immersed within this environment. And through that experience, I'm able to then harvest in a way. And so I'm seeing things within the formation itself, and then the sculpting process is starting from that early onset. It's very different than, typically the artist working in this medium would draw a shape, and then that shape would be procured, and that shape would be delivered, and then you would take it from there. And it's not as interesting, not interesting at all, really, frankly. But so to answer your question, I'm seeing things, but I'm seeing things that I might not do anything about, or I might go after. And within that procurement process, there may be all different directions that happen. And this is also consistent with the way in which material is taken out of the earth. So it's compatible in a way. It's never a straight course. And I find that liberating, which is why I find this context, this place, and other places like it around the world, fertile ground for me.
Very interesting. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for anybody? Well, I'm gonna tell just a quick story. My relationship with Sean. Um,
Uh-oh.
Karen, you may not want to hear this. No, only kidding. Relationship with Sean has been one of where he inspires me. But I've done a lot of camera whispering for Sean, and he's turned me on to the late Alan Arkin, who I got to do camera whispering for, and camera whispering is an honor to do it to these greats and these mentors and artists that you look up to. But one of them was years ago. He came to me, and I was playing with drones, and I was getting enthralled by the way that you could see photographs with a drone, which just it's a totally different viewpoint, and it's quite unique. And to get the viewpoint that a drone gives you in the past usually involved renting a helicopter, which is incredibly costly, as we all know. And so, so Sean came to me and said, he goes, I've got this interesting, excuse me, I've got this interesting project, and I want to use a drone to get this point of view that's really from on top down. And you know, what can you tell me about drones? So we started discussing drones and whatnot, and what he was talking about was wanting to incorporate drone photography into this project, and I thought that was so cool. And then Sean just turns it up another notch and does drone light painting, which is really another level, which is just an amazing technique to tell the story and to get in there, and especially allowing for that beautiful balance at nighttime, being able to see the work in different seasons and different times of the day is just pretty damn amazing. So so yeah, that's kind of my take on this project. And then when I went through the PDF and I saw the shots, the aerial shots, it all came together, and I'm like, that's what he was after. And it's really cool. And I made a note from our earlier. It's about you said before, try something new when you need it, versus just loading yourself up on lots of equipment and figuring it out from there. And I love it. Great idea. For those of you that were here right from the beginning when I talked about the photo retreat, the retreat in the woods, I always felt like it was a natural to invite Sean, because Sean did the among trees, which I could give me a camera and put me in a forest, and it's just it's great. It's lovely. And Darrell, when you talked about connecting with the natural world, such a beautiful way to do it. You're like a dwarven miner though, where Sean's more like an elf working among the woods. So it's bring a little Tolkien into this, but
Thank you very much. Thank you, Darrell.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Sean.
yeah, and thank you both and everyone who came along for this trip. So I'm gonna end it now, and we'll keep talking and keep making art. Amazing, everybody.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Have a great night.